Here we are with informative speaking. We've moved into the second half of the semester, and so we're moving on with the next two assignments, the informative speech and the persuasive speech. This particular PowerPoint I developed contains some material that I also covered in my lecture on the organizing your speech. I'm not quite sure, I complain about this book all the time. The book is redundant in that it has it in both sections as well. So I will talk about the types and patterns of speech again, but I'm only going to just review it, and that's what you can use this for as well, because you've already seen this. When I get to that part, I will once again emphasize the fact that this is important, that you will have to show me on your outline what type and pattern, along with a couple of other things, that you have chosen for your informative speech. So here we are. I'll get started. Chapter 13, which I've asked you to read, is all about informative speaking. And I always start with those three Aristotelian elements: logos, ethos, and pathos. What those elements do, remember, is they provide balance for your speech. You have to have some part of each of these elements present in any speech, or the speech just isn't going to work very well, if at all. And when I think about these three elements, especially in this case for informative speaking, I wonder, well, which one would I list first, second, and third? And you can see here on the slide, I've listed logos first, ethos second, and pathos third. Why would I do that? Okay, you have to remember what each one is. Logos is logic or structure. Ethos is credibility, the speaker's credibility. And pathos is all about emotion. And what does emotional content provide in a speech? It provides connection with your audience. So 1, 2, 3. So I'm saying in an informative speech, logos should be first. You're giving information. So having good logical structure in the way you present this information is going to make it so much easier for your listeners. You can't bounce around from point to point. You have to really make sure that the structure works. So I list logos first. Ethos, credibility. Why should anybody be listening to you on this topic? And credibility essentially says, I'm a, and I'll air quote here, an authority on whatever topic I'm talking about. And you're saying, wait a minute, I'm going to give a speech on the science of sleep, but I'm certainly not a scientist that studies sleep. I'm just interested in the topic. That's fine. That's your credibility. I'm going to give a speech about gold, and I'll show you what my credibility is when I get there. Okay. And no, I don't have a house filled with gold. I just find it really interesting. All right. So ethos, it's all about credibility. Once again, I will give you plenty of examples on how to establish credibility without being a world expert on whatever it is you're talking about. But then pathos, okay, that emotional connection. Even though it's an informative speech, this isn't like math class, your calculus class, where you're thinking there ain't any emotion in math. Maybe not, but that's not the point here. In a speech where you're trying to deliver information, whatever it might be, then you also need that emotional connection, pathos. Let me go back just, and as always, I sidetrack a little bit. Let me go back to a speech about sleep. You could open your speech with, we've all had a bad night's sleep, haven't we? And we know how crummy we feel all day long because of that bad night's sleep. Well, I just did two things, really. If I made that statement at the beginning of a speech on sleep, an informative speech, what have I done here? First of all, That was an attention getter, wasn't it? A grabber. We've all had a bad night's sleep. I'm saying I'm just like everyone else in this audience. We've all had this experience. So I go on to say, when you have a bad night's sleep, you feel bad all day long because of it. That's an emotional statement. So, yes, you can get all three of these elements, logos, ethos, and pathos, into your speech. And of course, when you provide me your speeches, unfortunately online, I will be looking to see if you have this balance in your speech. Logical structure, credibility, why we should listen to you about your topic, and some kind of emotional connection. All right. So I've mentioned there's two different speeches that you'll be giving in the second half of this semester, informative and persuasive. And this is one of my, I call them the duh slides. All right, this is a duh slide. What's the difference between informative and persuasive? Well, duh. Informative, you're just trying to give information, and persuasive, you're trying to convince people of something. All right, but sometimes that's a fine line, isn't it? It can be a very fine line between informative and persuasive. So make sure that when you develop your speech, you're not just talking about what you think, what you believe. You're providing information. Oh, all of a sudden you're thinking, oh, that means I need to talk about what other people think on the topic as well. You betcha. So, yes, informative is just there to provide information. Persuasive is just exactly what it says. You're trying to convince people of some way of thinking or believing, doing, acting, whatever it might be. Uh, do people get persuasive in informative speeches? Well, yeah. When I give my gold speech, I want you to listen, or I want you to listen very carefully to see if I get persuasive in that speech. I'll let you be the judge on that one. Okay, so yes, it's a little hard, but you don't want to completely cross the line to where your informative speech turns entirely into a persuasive speech. Some time ago, I had a student give what was supposed to be an informative speech on incarceration in America of minorities, especially blacks and African Americans. And his speech started out very informative, but he was very, very passionate on this topic, and it turned into an outright persuasive speech. That can happen when you really are interested in your topic. So, again, you need to be careful. One other example, I had a speech once on genetically modified organisms, GMOs, and why this particular speaker believed that they weren't a good thing. All right. She turned that speech into a persuasive speech because she was so passionate about it. It's fine. You need to be interested and even passionate about whatever topic you decide to speak on, but at the same time, you can't cross that line. And I have even suggested to people, use the GMO speech, for example, you can give your informative speech on what are genetically modified organisms. Where do they occur? Where do you find them? How are they used? That's informative. You could make your second speech, if you want, on GMOs are bad for us. Or you might choose the other. GMOs are a great idea. Whatever. So you might think about that, and you're welcome to do this. You're welcome to take your informative speech and turn it into a persuasive speech. First of all, it might save you some time. Secondly, if it's a topic, your informative topic is something you really, really are interested in, it might give you a platform to then convincingly move into a persuasive version of that speech. Something to think about. And of course, you're welcome to email me and ask me if I think your topic might work for that. All right, so simple, really. I'll just read this. Informative is just that, it's informative. An informative speech, in an informative speech, you do not inject your opinion. Okay, and again, if you start using words like I think, I believe, then you're probably expressing an opinion. According to, well, that's informative. It's not your opinion. So once again, be very, very careful as you start thinking about your informative topic to make sure it's something that you don't cross that line into persuasion. And I say, what are some examples here? Well, uh, I'll come back to those examples. I have some of those as we go along. All right. Uh, and this is straight from the book. Uh, the whole idea of informative speaking is to deepen the understanding of a topic for your audience, raise awareness of some topic. I'm not going to say issue because that tends to lead to a persuasive presentation. Uh, and increasing the topic, knowledge in your topic, in other words, to educate. And as I've said before, when you go to a class or if you're taking classes online and your professor's sitting there like I am, expounding on some topic, it's informative, isn't it? All right. Now, I sometimes slide into persuasion when I'm trying to convince you of something that's important beyond just the information. But generally speaking, all the classes you take are informative in nature. All right. So, what are the objectives for this particular assignment? And once again, do not panic. I'm going to post my presentation, my gold topic, uh, and then I'm going to show you my outline. Yes, you will have to do a more rigorous outline this time, and I will provide you with all of this information. But here's the basics. These are the basic objectives for this presentation. Learning how to focus on your topic, and I've used this example before. Professor Ray, I want to do a speech about the ocean. Okay, great. What about the ocean? It's wet. It's salty. Well, wait a minute. Which ocean? There's 7 seas. Arr, matey, there are 7 seas. Uh, are you going to talk about the Pacific Ocean, the Atlantic Ocean, the Indian Ocean, the Arctic Ocean? Which one are you going to pick? Okay. The Pacific Ocean. Okay. That's still quite literally, a really big topic. So you need to focus down and focus down. Once again, I will give some examples of this and talk about this a little later. So I'll be looking to make sure that you have actually chosen a topic and then focused in on one particular aspect of that topic. I think my clock's going to go off here pretty soon. I forgot to stop it, but we'll just enjoy the chimes when they get here. Okay, organizational skills. And again, this boils down to a good outline and preparation. Once more, I'm going to go over outlining again specifically for an informative speech. The target time, I have 6 to 8 minutes on here. I may modify that a little bit and shorten it, partly for my own sanity, because that's a lot of long speeches to listen to. So we'll work on that. Working from your outline, just as you did with the self-introductory speech. Research skills, yes. In this speech, during the speech, and once again, I'll give examples. During the speech, you must vocalize, say out loud, at least 3 references, according to, in a study by, whatever it might be. You have to have at least 3. You're going to need at least 5 on the outline. And extemporaneous speaking, preparation and practice. Now, I didn't change this slide, and I probably should have for this purpose. Incorporating media. Normally, in the classroom setting, I have a requirement that everyone use PowerPoint, Prezi, Google Slides, something within the context of their speech. I think that's going to be very difficult for this presentation where most of you are using a phone to record your speech. I'll come back to this. When I give my informative speech on gold, I'm going to do it two ways. One is I'm going to use the PowerPoint that I would use in class so you can see it in action. And then I'm also going to present the speech without the PowerPoint, just me and a pile of gold. Arr, I can't get away from my pirates. No pile of gold. Don't have a pile of gold. But the point is I'll do it both ways so you can kind of get an idea of how you might approach this without some sort of visual aid. Now, one way you could incorporate, again, air quotes here, media, is you might still be able to use objects in your speech, depending on what you're talking about. You might be able to hold something up. We'll explore this a little bit later. But the main objectives is focusing in on your topic, narrowing it down to something manageable, organizing it correctly. What type of speech is it? What pattern are you using? Meeting the target time. I don't want any 15-minute speeches, no matter how excited you are about a topic. That outline, developing and working from an outline, researching your topic, and of course, preparation and practice, an extemporaneous presentation. All right. So, again, you'll find this in chapter 13. What are the characteristics of an informative speech? Well, first of all, it needs to be meaningful. If it's just a bunch of dry facts, no one's going to care. You can look this stuff up on Google. I had a speech once, an informative speech on the solar system, where the student just simply went through, here's Mercury, and Mercury is this far from the sun, and it's this big. Here's Venus, and it's blah, blah, blah. It was so dull, we almost all went to sleep. It wasn't meaningful at all. It didn't connect with the audience. If I were going to give an informative speech on the solar system, I might start with Mars. Today I'm going to talk about the solar system, but I'm going to start with Mars because Mars has the most potential for supporting human life. Okay. Oh, there was an emotional connection there too, wasn't there? Okay. Accurate. Make sure your information is accurate. That goes back to the research component. Clarity. That all comes from your organization. Here comes my clock. It's very loud, but clarity, making sure I'll talk over the clock. I'm going to talk right into my microphone. I think I mentioned this. A few years ago, I was standing in a little park outside of Parliament in London. And of course, the great tower of Big Ben rises above this park. You've all seen that iconic picture, I bet, of Big Ben. And it was 11 o'clock, and Big Ben started to chime. It was a soul-impacting experience. The sound of that bell filled that space. You could feel it. And that's my little bit of Big Ben that just went off. All right. And then, of course, your speech, because it's relatively short, needs to be limited in scope, focused. All right. Now, here comes the review part. I'm not going to spend a huge amount of time on this. At the top of your outline, I'm going to have you provide a number of different bits of material for me to look at that indicate to me that you really did think about and work on and research your topic. So you will be required to tell me what type of speech it is. Is it an object speech, process, an event, or concept? You need to figure that out before you start working on the speech. And you're going to put that in a heading at the top of your outline so that I can look at it, see what you decided. Now you might think, oh, God, I can't decide if it was an event or a process speech. I'm going to choose process. I hope Ray doesn't get upset with me. There's all kinds of ways to mess around with this, but generally speaking, the important thing here is that you put some thought into it and choose what should be the correct type of speech. And again, these are the same slides you've seen before. Here are some examples of objects. Remember, people are objects if you're talking about them in a real spatial manner. a biographical speech about Susan B. Anthony and what she did. The human eye, the Pacific Ocean. Once more, these are all topics that are huge. Dogs. Okay, I'm going to narrow it down. I'm going to talk about terriers. Oh, wait a minute. I just did some research. There are 42 recognized breeds of terriers. That's too many. All right, I'm going to talk about my favorite type of terrier, the West Highland White Terrier. All right, so you can see these are very broad topics, but they're all object types. Speaking of West Highland White Terriers, I have one trying to get in and out of my office here. Here's some other examples. The process speech. Remember, you don't want to turn even your informative speech into a demonstration speech of some kind. But here's some examples of process. You've seen these before. Events, sinking of the Titanic. I will provide you with an outline of a sinking of the Titanic speech that I found online. It wasn't a speech that was given in my class, but I think the outline's pretty good. It's a little bit too detailed, but I'll talk about that once I post it for you. But that's obviously an example of an event speech. Anything that you're talking about that happened, it's an event. All right, what else here? The concepts, whatever it might be, religion, science, black hole theory, string theory, communication theory. These are all examples of concepts. So again, object, process, event, or concept. You will need to put this up at the top of your outline so I know what type of speech you're giving. Don't forget those patterns. Oh, yes, here they are again. Once again, you can go back and review this PowerPoint. It's in the file without my lovely little face over in the corner. You can just step through them and use them as review material. So patterns, chronological, spatial, topical, narrative, and cause and effect. Chronological leads the audience step by step through something that's happened. It might be a process or an event speech. Those work very well for chronological. You could be an object speech, and you're going to give a speech about, I'll stick with Susan B. Anthony, the great suffragette of the early 20th century America. And you're going to talk about the events of her life. Well, then it's probably going to fall nicely into a chronological speech. Once again, don't turn it into a demonstration speech. I've already posted these in my other PowerPoint, but again, here it is for review. A chronological speech pattern, and so this is one example. As I said before, not a very good example. Spatial pattern, physical relationships. I had a wonderful speech on the periodic table. Yes, it was quite interesting the way the student approached it. Had a lot of fun with it. And it was an object speech because he was talking about something real, but he was talking about the relationship of noble gases and metals and various other things. And like I said, he had fun with it. It wasn't just a dry science kind of lecture. This was the example that was used in the book again. All right, topical. Remember, topical is the one that is probably most often used, where you have a large topic and you then just subdivide that topic into, in this case, we'll stick with three major subpoints or main points, excuse me. Here was the example, the dog show and how dog shows happen. Narrative, my favorite. What is narrative? It says it right there. It's all about using storytelling to provide the information. And I use the example of a speech I actually gave, although it's also in the book. It's an object type of speech because I talked about the planet Pluto, but I used a storytelling pattern to provide the information. All right, so cause and effect shows how an action proceeds to an outcome. And once again, the example that was given was the Maori New Year. Here's another example. Let's say you want to give a speech about the assassination of Abraham Lincoln, April 4th, 1865. All right. Now, you could do this a number of different ways. It could be an object speech. You're talking about Lincoln as a real person. It could be an event speech. First this happened, then that happened. First John Wilkes Booth got into the theater. Secondly, he shot Abraham Lincoln. Thirdly, he leapt off the balcony onto the stage, breaking his leg, but he still got away. All right. So that's chronological in pattern. How about cause and effect? The assassination of the assassination of Abraham Lincoln by John Wilkes Booth in 1865 set into motion a series of events. First, Lincoln was assassinated. Secondly, his vice president, Andrew Johnson, came into office. That caused Congress to pass laws on the rebuilding of the southern states that were onerous. Get my point here? So you can go at this a number of different ways. All right, so once again, types of speeches, objects, process, events, concepts. You have to pick one of those. Tell me what type it is. And then you have to pick a pattern. What's the pattern you're using? Chronological, spatial, topical, narrative, cause and effect. Why am I making you do all this? It's not just because I say so. Maybe it is. But really, truly, it is because once you decide this, and you decide this before you start writing the speech, before you start researching the speech, if you know what type of speech it is and what pattern you're using, it's going to make your job so much easier. It will also provide really good structure to your speech. So that's why this is important. All right, so some of the overall guidelines: keep it informative. Don't let it slide over into being persuasive. Again, if you start using terms like I think and I believe, it's probably persuasive. Don't be afraid to use descriptive language. As I said, that speech I had once about the periodic table, the student had a fun kind of talking about the gases as these squishy things, and the important. It was just, he used a lot of descriptive language. Again, don't be afraid to do that. When you watch my speech on gold, see if I use descriptive language. Connect with people. What of the three elements connects with your audience? Pathos, that's right. Some kind of emotional content into your speech. It can be through examples, it can be through any number of ways that you can provide that emotional content. But once again, it all boils down to providing information and educating. So there you go. That's basically a summary of what's in Chapter 13. There will be another PowerPoint lecture where I'm going to talk specifically about the thesis statement and in your specific purpose, your purpose for the speech. But that will be a separate presentation, so you can watch for that one. As always, I hope you found this helpful, and we'll just keep moving right along and getting ready for the informative speech. Thanks a lot.